Welcome back, everybody. This is session 2 on day 1 of hearing stream 2. And we have already just dealt with the general residential zone and a presentation from Wheatley. We're now moving on to the settlement zone and a presentation from Ms. Falloon. We have a summary statement from you, Ms. Falloon. Do you want to take us through that?
Yes, I can. Good morning, Chair and panel. My name is Alice Falloon. I am an intermediate resource planner at Masterton District Council. I've been involved in the proposed district plan since the middle of 2023. I'm the author of the Section 42A report for Settlement Zone, and my qualifications and experience are set out in that report. While I have prepared the Section 42A report, I was not involved in the review or preparation of the residential zones, which includes the settlement zone. Would you like me to go through the overview of this?
Yes, please.
Under the operative district plan, one residential zone manages residential areas across the Wairarapa, including all larger towns such as Masterton, Carterton, Greytown, Featherston and Martinborough, as well as the smaller residential settlements located on the coast and in rural areas such as Castle Point, Riversdale, Cape Palliser, Ngawi, Whatarangi, Lake Ferry, Whangai Moana and South Featherston. Under the proposed district plan, residential zones have been split into the general residential zone and the settlement zone. The settlement zone covers the residential areas that I have just mentioned before, so that's the smaller settlements of Castle Point, Riversdale, Cape Palliser, Ngawi, Whatarangi, Lake Ferry, Whangai Moana and South Featherston. This settlement zone now enables these smaller rural and coastal settlements to be managed under bespoke objectives, policies and rules to protect their unique character in comparison to larger residential townships. The purpose of the zone is to provide for larger scale residential sites and associated on-site servicing where required. A summary of the contents of the settlement zone chapter is attached in Appendix 1 to this summary.
Ms. Falloon, is there anything in Appendix 1 that you want to put forward to the panel? Pages 4 and 5.
Not necessarily, other than just noting that in the settlements, more focus on that lower density residential land use. And that's just noting that in some of these settlements, there's no services, so it needs to be on-site servicing.
Any questions arising just on the provision themselves? That seems reasonably clear. Thank you.
So a total of 81 original submission points and 22 further submission points were received on the settlement zone. The submissions received were generally in support of the chapter's policies, rules and standards. Submitters that requested amendments generally sought a more enabling rule framework for compatible land use activities, greater consideration of Indigenous biodiversity and the protection of rivers, greater protection of the zone from incompatible activities, and amendments to the water supply standards. Submitters were in support of the overarching objectives and policies that provided for small scale services to the community. I have read.
Oh, sorry, just so from your paragraph 7, can you make it that there was a absence of any submission challenging the settlement zone or the rezoning to settlement from general residential on any of those small settlements that you've listed?
Yes.
Okay. Good, thank you for that.
I have read the relevant evidence of Paul McGimpsey on behalf of Fire and Emergency New Zealand, and I respond to this evidence below. All the changes recommended. Summary. I've listed these in key issues. The key issue 1 was the provision for emergency service facilities. Mr McGimpsey, on behalf of Fire and Emergency, seeks that emergency service facilities be a permitted activity within the settlement zone. If this relief is not granted, he alternatively seeks that emergency service facilities be provided for as a restricted discretion. Provided matters of discretion I do not agree with permitted activity status for facilities can vary greatly in nature and scale and can result in a range of different effects that may not be anticipated for in the settlement zone. But I do agree with Mr. McGimpsey that a restricted discretionary activity is appropriate for emergency service facilities in the settlement zone. I consider the matters of discretion will need to be specifically tailored to the settlement zone, considering the zone is primarily for residential purposes. I maintain that while the function of emergency service facilities is generally consistent with the objectives and policies for the settlement zone, I consider their compatibility in the settlement zone will depend on their location, scale, hours of operation, and the type of activity, among other things. Move on to key issue 2. This is brief. That's provisions for firefighting water supply. Mr. McGimpsey has noted in paragraph 21 of his evidence that the standard sets 9 already contains the wording he is requesting be adopted within other zones.
So it's not pursuing that matter any further.
No. As such, no changes are being asked for in the settlement zone with regard to the water supply standard. I therefore consider this as no longer a matter of contention. So section 5 of my summary is just talking to the pre-circulated evidence. The recommended amendments in response to submissions on the settlement zone and as noted in my section 42A report are as follows. Amending the definition of supported residential care facilities, that has been included in the general residential section 42A report, and the amendment of the heading for standard sets S9 from drinking water supply to water supply. And that's to provide greater clarity to the intention of the standard. The recommended amendments in response to pre-circulated evidence on the settlement zone includes the insertion of a new rule for emergency service facilities as discretionary activity in the settlement. Based on the matters raised in submissions and pre-circulated evidence, the following key matters remain in contention. I note that no evidence has been received on these matters, and I have recommended rejecting these in the settlement zone section 42A report. So I've just noted these in key kind of themes.
Yes.
The first being the management of natural environment values in the settlement zone. The first point raised was whether there should be inclusion of Indigenous biodiversity provisions in the zone, and whether there should be a new provision to protect rivers within the settlement zone chapter. Second point was a new rule for supported residential care facilities. And that was whether there needs to be a new rule for supported residential care facilities in the settlement zone, so that transitional housing is not inadvertently a discretionary activity under sets R15, which is a catch-all discretionary rule. The third being relocated dwelling provisions. So that was whether the reference to performance bonds in the zone policies should be deleted, whether policies should better recognise and provide for the positive effects of relocated buildings, and whether to amend the relocated dwelling standards to remove reference to performance bonds, transport routes and traffic management plans. And this submission has been received on all chapters. And then lastly, it was the matters of discretion for education facilities and whether they should be revised. And that was from Ministry of Education. So,
Thank you. We'll check to see if there's any questions arising.
I've got a couple. Just in your follow-on report that you've gone through, we've missed out South Featherston in it. Is that, I presume that's the mistake, the error?
oh, yes, sorry, thank you.
And I'm just questioning Pirinoa. Where does that sit in our? Pirinoa has a school and store and
Yeah,
circulated water and.
mind if I just check the GIS maps quickly?
Yeah.
Sorry.
Can't think of any others that be of that size.
It's not settlement zone? No. So it looks like that will be general general rural zone, not settlement zone.
So my question then is, how have we defined these, given the similarities of Puranawa to all the other listed ones we've got there?
Yeah.
I can't see any difference.
So with the settlement of those towns that have gone into the settlement zone, it looks like it's been taken from what was residential or general residential zone. So under the operative district plan, that might have been in the general residential.
Do we need to look at that then?
I can look to just double check that.
Are you saying that, what's the name of the town?
Puranawa.
Puranawa.
Mm.
Is that zone general rule in the operative district plan, and it's only been carried across into the proposed plan?
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking, but I am I able to double check?
Sorry, I thought I'm silent.
If you wouldn't mind, if you, unless there's a submission requesting it with hands largely tied, but it would be useful to see whether section 32 addresses that in any way.
I'm thinking it may, so I will just need to have another look.
You've come back to us on how the section 32 dealt with Puranawa.
Seems strange that.
So that's in section 32.
Other than that,
Oh, yeah.
okay. Any other? You had another one else?
No, those two.
I think nothing, Mr. Lewin. The new rule for supported residential care facilities, which is just a context. You've adopted a suggested definition for that term. Presumably, does that come from the National Planning Standards? Or is that?
Yes, it does.
Okay.
Yes, and that was through the general residential side,
Yes.
section 42A, but I know the submission was in regard to the settlement zone as well. Yes, yeah.
But you haven't recommended a bespoke rule for supported residential care facilities, so therefore they caught by that catch-all rule in the settlement zone and presumably in other residential zones also.
So the definition change means that transitional homes are no longer caught by that rule, which it wasn't the intention to include those. So they'll just become residential activities.
So what do you mean by transitional homes?
So that's transitional accommodation. I believe Department of Corrections has outlined what that means.
Okay.
Their submission.
So they are not part of the new definition. Okay. So therefore they're part of they're basically part of the general residential activity. Was there a corresponding change to the definition of residential activity to reflect that?
I don't believe so.
Okay. Does it need to be?
Oh yeah, I might, if that's okay. I'll put that here again.
Sure. I think I primarily address this in my residential section 42A. So what we did is they were concerned that they would be caught under potentially a residential activity or a supported residential care facility. The intention for the supported residential care facility was to provide for small scale, say retirement or hospice, that kind of thing. And so we amended the supported residential care facility definition, to refer to people who are elderly, ill or disabled, and that kind of thing, to exclude transitional housing, which is where I understand is where people transition out of prison and into the general population. And I don't think we could amend the residential activity definition if we wanted to, because I believe it's a national planning standards.
It is. Okay. And the Department of Corrections aren't giving any evidence.
So
you. Shows the cross linkages between the different chapters. We're going to hear from Heavy Haulage Association, I think, later today.
5 o'clock.
5 o'clock. And those relocated dwelling provisions affect all the residential zones, not just the settlement zone. I don't have anything more. So thank you for your presentation. Okay, so that takes us now on to the zones and they seated Ms. Balloon. Again. So this is a reasonably sizable topic, but like the residential zone that us really. So just take your time taking us through everything statement. I think you weren't involved in the plan, these, so you can probably start at paragraph 3.
So collectively a total of 167 original submission points. And I
Sorry,
apologise. Did you mean to?
paragraph 3,
Okay,
item 2, yes.
sorry. Under the operative Wairarapa Combined District Plan, commercial areas were managed under a single commercial zone. Under the proposed district plan, this commercial zone has been split into 3 zones, being the neighbourhood centre zone, mixed use zone and town centre zone. The centres zone topic covers these 3 zones, the centres design guide and definitions relating to the centre zones. The 3 centre zones seek to achieve different outcomes, which are set out in their respective objectives. However, a common focus across all 3 centre zones is protecting the vibrance and viability of the town centre zone. All 3 centre zones have been structured the same, with overarching objectives and supporting policies, rules and standards. A summary of the centres zones, their purpose and their functionality is set out in Appendix 1 to this summary.
Yes. Again, I'll invite you to go to page 7. And is there anything in particular about that zone you'd like to prioritize for those zones?
Yeah, so what I might do is I'll just briefly talk to the difference between the 3 zones. I think it might be useful. So the town centre zone is geographically located at the centre of each Wairarapa's main towns. The purpose of the town centre zone is to be the principal focal point of a community and provide vibrant areas where a range of appropriately scaled cultural and recreational areas activities. Mixed use zone is intended to provide for a compatible mixture of residential, commercial, industrial, recreational and community activities. It's generally located on the fringes of the town centre and near to industrial areas. The neighbourhood centre zone is located in the Masterton urban area only, with the purpose of supporting a limited range of small-scale commercial and community activities that service the needs of the immediate residential neighbourhood. I've provided some examples such as dairies, convenience stores, laundromats, that sort of thing. I think that's probably the main thing you need to know about the difference between the 3 centre zones. So if you don't mind, I'm happy to go from.
I have some questions, if you don't mind. What I'm interested in understanding, similar to what the residential zone is, how the centres design guide is triggered in relation to the different centres. Can you elaborate on that, please?
Yeah, so where an activity is not permitted and needs a resource consent, they should consider the centre's design guide. It's not, I guess, again, it's not that they're forced to include reference to it specifically, but kind of the general concepts of the centre's design guide would be good.
Could you take us to an example of a rule? Presumably it's a restricted discretionary activity, is it?
Yes.
That would indicate how the design guide is triggered and considered.
Yes, I can. So, for example, maybe a retail activity that I might be in the wrong sense, sorry.
What zone are you going to look at?
Sorry, I'm in the town centre zone
Yes.
at the moment.
Okay.
Well,
maybe start with the policies then that mention the design guide. I can see one under P3. I can see one. Sorry.
Oh, sorry, you go. Oh, sorry. So residential activities. For example, so town centre zone P3 is for residential activities. It notes in P3E that we should be providing for residential activity where it's consistent with the centre's design guide, and that's taking in mind the other matters above that as well. And so if you look to rule, let's go. I apologise.
That's okay. Don't take your time. Would it be 12?
I think so. It's just scrolling down there. Yep. So rule TCZR 12. So if a residential activity doesn't have a residential unit that complies with TCZR 1, which is the built standard, and TCZR 3, which is the rules around the number of units,
yes,
then that could trigger an assessment with the centre's design guide. But I note that's a discretionary activity.
Yes.
Yeah.
TCZR 13.
If you look at TCZR 3, which it's more explicit in there, relocatable buildings, for example, where it's not a permitted activity, falls as a restricted discretionary activity, where it doesn't comply with, oh, that's the wrong reference, TCZR 3.
Yes.
And it does list the centre's design guide as a matter of discretion.
The what provision?
That is TCZR 3. One.
Oh, yes. Next page, yes. Next page. Okay. So the census design guide is dealing with not just commercial and retail activities, it will also deal with residential activities within the zone.
Yes.
Okay, where there's non-compliance with a rule or standard.
Yes.
Okay. And sorry, that's more, is it?
Yeah.
With presumably the centre design guide is split into those different component parts.
It's not actually. It deals with them. It addresses when doing residential, because in the early days we discussed whether to have separate, because some other plans do go for you have to look at both, but it does make it quite confusing. So we focused on writing guidelines within it that say when doing residential, just so we can keep with the one suite of documents for the zone.
useful if, Sloan, if you could provide us with a table that, indicates the rule that, and the, appropriate standards, that, impact on the town centre zone, and either for both those are restricted discretionaries and also where they would be obviously captured as a fully discretionary activity. And just to maybe align that with any of the policies, such as the policy we discussed earlier on residential.
And sorry, was that just in general, how they talk to each other?
Yes.
Or the centre's design guide?
How they talked, how the policies and rules, talk to the centre's design guide.
Yeah.
Tabular approach will be fine. And again, the centre's design guide sits within the district plan, doesn't it?
Yes.
Are we, presumably there'd be a separate hearing for the design guides for you, or not? Looking at Hamish.
So that's a full part of it, and there are to view submissions on the design.
Okay. Hey, well, we interrupted you. You were down at paragraph 8.
So I was at 3, I think.
Yeah, matters raised.
Collectively, a total of 167 submission points and 12 further submission points were received on the centre zone topic. Within the centre zone topic, there was a relatively even split of submissions in support and those requesting amendments or additions to certain chapters. As a result of submissions, several changes have been recommended. Read the respective evidence submitted in relation to the centre zones topic, and that those listed below. Acknowledge the evidence provided by Mr. Tracy on behalf of Harvey Norman pertaining to the zoning of 20 High Street. I note this will be addressed in the rezoning hearing, which is hearing stream 30.
That was one of the last hearings.
I respond to the remaining evidence below. All changes recommended have been included in Appendix 2 to the summary, along with a supporting Section 32 AA assessment. So this key issue 1 is around the setback to the railway corridor. That was also one that was Ms. Wheatley talked to as well.
Yes, we could probably cut to the chase here. You recommended adoption of the 5 metre setback as the most appropriate mechanism, whereas Ms. Wheatley has relied on the height in relation to boundary in the residential zones, and that's purely a function of the different heights that are permitted in the respective zones. Is that one? In terms of the 5 metre setback, are you satisfied that that full width is required to deal with the effect that Kiwi Rail have identified?
They've added seeking the 5 metre setback, and I'm satisfied with the 5 metre setback.
Yeah. Were you able to ascertain how other councils around the country have dealt with this issue? Yeah, district plan reviews?
No, not off the top of my head. I could have a look and get back to you.
Well, it's a question that will probably put to the witnesses for Kiwi Rail. So just be on notice that we may need you to come back to us on that.
Is there a standard width of the rail corridor through our towns?
I think it varies. Standard width, I don't know off the top of my head.
The measurements, if I may, Mr Chair, the measurements that I've done, it's been reasonably consistent of about 20 metres. Some narrowing in places, others wider where there's stations, but about 20.
That's assuming single track.
And that's the width of the designated corridor presumably, and is the entirety of the corridor designated?
Yes.
In your paragraph
That
15,
increase it to 30, that would increase it to 30 then, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
On,
Yeah.
the whole corridor is on average 20 metres and they're requesting 5-metre setbacks effectively on either side. That will take it to 30 metre.
depending on what the zoning is.
Yeah.
So if it
Or-
joins
or
general
28.
resident, if it joins residential on one side,
Mm.
it'll be 0 under the recommendation from Ms Wheatley. If it adjoins MUZ or town centre zone, industrial would be another 5.
Yeah,
Will you list the number of properties adjoining the rail corridor in your summary statement? Do any of those properties, is there any infringement of the 5-metre corridor by those properties already?
yes.
There is.
So this will apply to new buildings,
Yes.
particularly, I have, and the colour's a little bit saturated, so you can't quite see the buildings. But in Appendix 3, I've shown just from our maps, centre zone properties and zone properties along the rail.
Appendix 3.
Yes, Appendix 3.
In discussions with Q, have there been any issues that the current buildings have to say, oh, this has caused me to then to say we need a bigger setback?
I'm not aware of any, this is purely based on the evidence that they've provided. I'm not aware of any issues in the Wairarapa myself. I guess in taking a precautionary approach, we're applying this, recommending applying this 5-metre setback. Yeah, I'm not currently aware of any.
So it relate to new buildings or extensions to existing buildings.
Yes, that's right.
Where do we see that rule? What standard? It's under MUZ standard 3, is it?
Yes. Yes, MUZ S3 and TCZ S3.
Yes.
And so I've recommended slightly different wording.
So the chapeau to that rule says buildings or structures must not be located within. That would be new buildings or any alterations to existing buildings or structures. Where they are triggers to a RDA. There's a expectation of some consultation with Kiwi Rail at the time of a resource consent.
Yes.
Were there any, I'll go back to your 42A, were there many, if any, further submissions to the Kiwi Rail submission?
I don't believe there were any.
None. Issue 2 on firefighting. Just
I guess.
a similar issue to that raised earlier by or dealt with earlier by Ms Wheatley.
Yes, it's the same.
Yes. Okay, it's the same issue there is about whether we go for prescription. Okay. to wait until we hear from and similarly with provisions for emergency service facilities, you're suggesting restricted discretionary activity as opposed to permitted activity?
Yes.
Yes.
And that's in the neighbourhood centre zone and town centre zone, because the mixed use zone is already restricted discretionary activity.
Yes. Yes, there was no permission to the mixed use zone, was there?
No.
No.
That restricted discretionary.
The mixed use zones only, the neighbourhood centre zones only found in Masterton, isn't it?
Yes.
And it's effectively a sort of a spot zoning of existing
Yeah.
small scale activities like dairies and convenience stores,
Correct.
laundromats. How appropriate is it to provide for foreign emergency service activities in such a small zone?
Yeah, well, I guess what areas of discretion we'll look at assessing. So it would be subject to a resource consent, hence why permitted is not the most acceptable. I consider it's not the most acceptable in the neighbourhood centre zone.
Yes. And you believe you could capture all of the effects through the matters of discretion without going to a fully DA in the
I believe
neighbourhood zone?
Yeah, I believe so. And also noting that subject to the built standards, built rules, which is NCZR1 as well.
Okay, that probably takes us on to issue 4 about the linkages for active transport.
So, Ms. Zollner, on behalf of the Greater Wellington Regional Council, seeks objective TCZ 03 be amended to explicitly refer to supporting the use of and linkages for active and public transport. In response to this submission, I had noted in my Section 42A report that limited weight should be given to the Regional Policy Statement Change 1, and the Transport chapter applies district-wide and provides this direction. Ms. Zollner considers this direction does not come from RPS Change 1 alone, noting it is supported through the National Policy Statement for Urban Development, the operative RPS, and the Future Development Strategy. Ms. Zollner also considers the Transport chapter may not be considered for all activities in the town. Retain that the Transport chapter, and specifically TR01, covers a well-connected, integrated, safe and accessible transport system. I agree with Ms. Zollner that the Transport chapter may not specifically cover all activities in the town centre zone. I therefore agree that a link between new activities in the town centre zone and their role in supporting the uses of and linkages for public and active transport could be more specifically referenced. However, I don't agree that this should be through objective TCZ 03. In my view, the change sought talks to the functionality of the zone. For example, TCZ 03 sets the overarching goal of the town centre zone being accessible. I therefore consider that reference to how this is done should be included in policy TCZP1 as a new point under D. I consider this thought, but I'm open to discussing this further. Ms. Zollner does not agree.
And you're satisfied that there's broad scope for that change to occur at the policy level as opposed to the objective level?
Yes.
5.
Issue 5, enabling greater housing density in the town centre zone. This change sought from Ms. to TC3, which she sought be amended to delete reference to the surrounding environment from clause F and replaced with new suggested wording that aims to provide opportunities for multi-unit housing and high-density development to better recognise the benefits of mixed-use development and reflect the NPSUD Objective 3 and Policy 5, the RPS, and the Wairarapa Wellington Horowhenua Future Development Strategy. Should this new wording not be accepted, she seeks that clause F be removed altogether. While I agree with Ms. Zollner's points in principle, I note that in the medium density residential precinct in the general residential zone, denser residential development is enabled. I therefore consider the proposed district plan has given effect to the MPSUD Objective 3, which seeks to enable, with my emphasis added, more people to live in and more services to be located in areas of an urban environment in which one or more apply. A, the area is in or near a centre zone or other area with employment opportunities. I also note that across the Wairarapa, all town centre zones adjoin the general residential zone. I consider it important to provide the right balance between providing for residential units as a permitted activity without compromising the availability of land for commercial and retail use within the town centre zone. The town centre zone across all main towns in the Wairarapa is the only zone solely focused on enabling a range of different commercial uses. For that reason, I maintain that any more than 2 units should go through an assessment to look at the appropriateness of the additional units and to look at any potential reverse sensitivity effects on existing legally established commercial uses. This formed some of the basis for the wording I had recommended in F. However, I have considered Ms. Zollner's position and reflected on the wording I recommended in clause F as part of my section 42A report. And upon a reflection, I agree with Ms. Zollner that this could have the unintended consequence of locking in an existing level of density, which was not the intention. The intention was to provide policy support to be able to consider higher density residential developments in the town centre zone where it could easily integrate into the existing scale, form, and appearance of that environment in line with the character of the town centre zone. I have looked at the recommended wording by Ms. Zollner and do not agree with the new wording suggested. I consider the suggested wording for clause F, requested by Ms. Zollner, pulls the intent of the policy toward a blanket support for residential development because higher density is anticipated in the town centre zone. However, enabling residential activities is not reflected in the purpose of the zone and is conditional, as shown through the preceding rule that places a limit on the number of units. I therefore recommend removing F entirely at this stage. I do, however, consider it may be worth adding support within policy TCZ P3 to enable more residential units to be established on a site where they are appropriate in the context of the town centre zone or where they can support the commercial vibrancy and viability. I am happy to discuss the appropriate way to do that with Ms. Zollner and report back to the panel. I've suggested the following wording. If the level of density that contributes to the vibrancy and viability of town centres and does not compromise the ability for sites to provide for compatible uses and development listed in TCZ P1 in that location.
Thank you for that. We'll take up your suggestion. Perhaps discuss that with Ms. Zollner after we've heard from Ms. Zollner later this afternoon. We'll do that though. Would there be scope to run with the alternative wording that you've suggested at the bottom of that page? At F, the new F?
I consider there as the submission point is related to F. And I don't think we're including new topic on it.
What's the policy that enables residential intensification in the town centre zone? Is it P3 or is it?
Yeah, TCZ P3 is around enabling residential activities, and it's got a number of matters listed underneath that that could provide some scope of where they could be enabled.
When the chapeau residential activity, including multi-unit housing, is provided for.
Yes. So that,
it meets certain criteria.
and I think that would provide a bit more support to that multi-unit
The new F.
as well. Yeah. Yes.
Do we end up with a potential problem though with if you increased density in the town centre, the reverse sensitivity on commercial activities in the town centre is likely to be compromised.
That's a matter that we would need to consider whether or not. So 2 units can be established as a permitted activity. Where they go over 2 units, that's one of the matters that we need to consider.
It might be suitable where you've got a bigger town centre, but if you look at Featherston or Greytown or, for example, it's tiny. If you start putting a lot of residential accommodation in there, all of a sudden the 2 bars in Greytown, for example, may well end up out of business because of a noise restriction, or your restaurants are not going to occur. So the alternative effect may well be to kill the town centre. So that's my only concern with making it easier rather than restricting it.
Would that only apply to new businesses? So existing businesses, would an instance like that cause?
Reverse sensitivity?
Hmm.
It would include new businesses as well, I believe, because it's talking to any commercial activities, reverse sensitivity. So it's a new unit, I guess, within an established town centre.
So would the reverse sensitivities have an impact on existing businesses? In the instance that.
That's what we would be looking to.
So policy F would be the key policy in that sense.
Yeah.
Level of density contributes to the vitality, does not compromise the ability of the site to provide for compatible uses and development that are listed in P1, which are basically commercial activities, aren't they? Commercial activities including retail, business services, food and beverage activities, community facilities, education facilities, healthcare, and visitor accommodation. So they're still given primacy.
Yes.
The increased residential density would only be accommodated where it doesn't compromise the ability for those to carry on.
The only problem is that there are certain laws, and alcohol is one, where the primacy is on if somebody objects to noise, that takes precedence over perhaps P1, for example, that says that, we're in a commercial environment. It doesn't actually matter. And that's the problem, that, when you've got a town centre that is 100 metres long and that's it, it might work better in a city. And I understand why they're trying to revitalise town centres in the cities, but revitalising town centres in small towns can have the exact opposite effect.
I think, and this is why I think I might need to have a conversation with Ms. Zollner as well, but it might also be worth asking her that question.
Okay, but in the meantime, your recommendation is not to accept the alternative wording proposed by Ms. Zollner, to delete clause F, and then the alternative to maybe insert new clause F along the lines you've suggested, but subject to some discussion on that.
Yes, that's right.
Understood.
Right. Is it worth having a delineation? Alice has brought up a very good point that it's maybe not appropriate for some towns within the Wairarapa area, but it may be more appropriate for maybe just 1 or 2.
I did consider that. So I did consider that option of allowing for more residential units in Masterton, whereas keeping it quite firm on the 2 residential units in South Wairarapa towns, for example. But it ended up making it more complicated than it needs to be. So I just stuck with the 2 across both, and then giving that policy direction to it could be considered in circumstances where it could be supported, which I presume would more be in Masterton, but rather than explicitly listing them as 2 different matters.
So you're relying on the resource consent process to sort these matters out.
Yeah, yes.
With appropriate policy direction.
Yes.
Okay, well, we'll take those matters up with Ms. Solner this afternoon. Okay,
This follows directly on from that above. So this is in regard to TCZR R1. That may be the wrong reference. Oh no, it is correct. So TCZR1C. Ms. Zollner for Greater Wellington Regional Council seeks that rule TCZR1 be amended to increase the number of residential units allowed for as a permitted activity from 2 units to 4 units. Ms. Zollner notes the reasoning for this change follows that attention in relation to policy TCZP3. She further notes that 2 residential units is too restrictive and that this would be regularly exceeded by developments. If this relief is not accepted, Ms. Zollner requests that the standard is removed altogether. Whilst the town centre zone is central in the Wairarapa urban environments, the town centres are easily accessible from surrounding general residential zones, and provisions have been included in the general residential zone to increase housing in the medium density residential precincts. I do not agree that 2 units as a permitted activity is too restrictive, and I maintain that the purpose of the town centre zone is to provide vibrant areas where a range of appropriately scaled commercial, community, cultural, and recreational activities are enabled. Keeping in mind reverse sensitivity on commercial uses is to be minimised, and the location should be assessed as being appropriate. I maintain my view that 2 residential units is appropriate under TCZR1C3. I consider it is appropriate that more than 2 residential units undergo an assessment to consider the surrounding land uses and commercial activities, amenity, and the appropriateness of that location for denser residential use.
very clear. What would be the implication if Ms. Zollner's request that the standard is removed altogether?
There would be an unlimited amount of units that could be permitted. Do you like me to read through section 5?
Yes, I would, please.
The main recommended amendments in response to submissions on the centre zone topic and noted in my section 42A report are as follows. Including a new rule for primary production activities in the neighbourhood centre zone as non-complying and recommending a consequential change to policy NCZP. Adding a new NPS definition for community corrections activity and a new associated rule in the mixed use zone, as well as a consequential change to policy MUZP1. Including a new rule enabling papakainga in the mixed use zone and town centre zone, and recommending consequential changes to MUZP1 and TCZP3. Amending the heading of the drinking water supply standard across all 3 zones to water supply, and replacing the terms heritage areas to heritage precincts throughout the centre's design guide, provide clarity that the guidance is for heritage precincts, and including more specific mention of shading elements, stormwater management, and Indigenous vegetation and trees.
Those 5 matters are no longer contested in any significant manner.
No, I don't believe so. The recommended amendments in response to the pre-circulated expert evidence are including a 5-metre setback from the railway designation within the town centre zone and mixed use zone, including new rules in the town centre zone and neighbourhood centre zone for emergency service facilities as restricted discretionary activity, including a new clause to the water supply standards in the neighbourhood centre zone, mixed use zone and town centre zone to require firefighting water supply in those occasions where a reticulated system is available or an additional level of service is required. Amending TCZP1 to refer to supporting the use of active public transport, which provides that link to the objective TCZ. Amending TCZP3 to remove clause F.
Or insert the new F.
Yeah, well, I'll have to have that conversation, I think, with Ms. Zollner. At this stage, it's just recommended to remove it altogether.
Yeah.
Based on the matters raised in submissions and pre-circulated expert evidence, the following key matters still remain in contention. Those matters raised by Ms. Zollner in regard to the town centres being those matters raised in the evidence 03, policy TCZP3 and rule TCZR1. And those matters raised in submissions addressed in the section 42A report that have not been directly responded to through submitted evidence.
Thank you, Balloon. I'll just check if there's any wrap up questions. Robin? Awesome. Craig? Nice. Thank you for your presentation. Little bit of further direction required from us after we hear from some of the witnesses over the next day or so. Okay, we'll push on. We have Ms. Adams within the open space and recreation zone. Welcome, Ms. Adams. Know the drill by now. I'll ask you to read through the presentation and as we go.
Yeah. I might just take the first two paragraphs as read. Know who I am.
Yes, we know that you weren't involved in the preparation on.
I'll start at paragraph 3. The purpose of the open space and recreation zones is to better facilitate the open space and recreational uses of Wairarapa's parks and reserves. The operative Wairarapa Combined District Plan does not include any open space zones. Public and private open space in the Wairarapa was generally included in the same zone as the surrounding area. The proposed district plan adopts 3 open space and recreation zones, being the sports and active recreation zone, open space zone, and the natural open space zone. The 3 open space and recreation zones identify the particular qualities and characteristics of sports and active recreation areas, reserves, and natural open spaces. 3 zones recognise that some activities are more compatible in certain zones and support a nuanced approach with rules tailored to the needs of the different zones. To illustrate the differences between the zones, a table is attached as Appendix 1 that provides an overview of the current framework for managing land use, buildings and structures, and the activities within each open space.
Yes. I want to just go to that table. I know you haven't provided any text as such, but is there anything in that particular table that you want to draw the panel's attention to?
Not particularly. I think it's quite clear, especially with the colouring of what's permitted and what requires resource consent. I'm just wondering, a bit like Ms. Balloon, to run through each zone.
Yes.
How they're a bit.
How they differ.
Yeah.
That would be useful.
Take that from my section 42.
Yes, that's in front of us.
Sports and active recreation zone provides for areas used predominantly for a range of indoor and outdoor sports and active recreation activities and their associated facilities and structures, including large-scale buildings. So these are the likes of Memorial Park in Masterton, Gladstone Sports Complex, Kieraneka Race Course, Solway, Clearville Showgrounds, and it's also been applied to all golf courses across the Wairarapa. The open space zone provides for a range of passive and active recreational activities, along with limited facilities and structures that are associated with those activities. Land in the open space zone is generally characterised by a sense of openness and a low level of development. It includes parks, playgrounds, community facilities, and informal recreation spaces in a range of sizes, locations, settings, and communities. And the zone also applies to existing council-owned cemeteries. The natural open space.
Sorry, I couldn't help chuckle about that. I'm not sure that's a. It's not really a recreational activity, is it?
It's very for some of my.
The natural open space zone recognises and provides for open spaces that contain high natural, ecological and landscape values. The natural open space zone is predominantly located along water bodies and at the edge of the coastal environment and has a high degree of biodiversity, which requires recognition.
So what would have that been zoned under the operative district?
It was just rural.
Just rural,
Yeah.
not a conservation zone or anything?
No, I believe it's the Tararuas and Rimatakas. They did have overlays like the coastal environment. Yeah. It includes significant areas in rural environments that are held in public ownership and managed for conservation purposes, including the Rimataka, Tararua and Aorangi Forest Parks and Lake Wairarapa. Some land is managed under the Conservation Act and may be subject to conservation management strategies or plans. And Section 343 of the RMA permits certain activities undertaken by the Crown on land held or managed under the Conservation Act. Yeah.
One of the things the table doesn't show, and that's not a criticism, is it shows that buildings and structures are permitted subject to standards in all three zones, but presumably the standards differ in each zone. So the size of building, I imagine, and the FARZ would differ from that in the OSD thing.
I believe sports, the SARS and the Oz, they're similar. I think they're 10 metres in height, whereas in the natural open space, it's a 5 metre height restriction.
Is there any controls on floor area? Or is it just height?
I believe it's just height. Yeah, just height.
Just height? Yeah. Okay, let's flick back to section 3, matters raised and submissions.
A total of 80 submission points and 13 further submission points were received on the open space and recreation zones and their mapped extents. The greatest number of submissions received were on the natural open space. Within all zones and topics, there was a relatively even split of submissions in support and those requesting amendments or additions. There was limited outright opposition or requests to delete specific provisions.
Was there any opposition to zoning?
Yes, I have that in front of me.
So we're talking more privately owned course, for example, or Carterton Golf Course, or because they're privately owned.
I believe we consulted with all those private landowners beforehand. I think the only oppositions I recall receiving were where they were actually just errors.
Errors in?
Like there was a circumstance, I think in Martinborough, and they were zoned, it was a residential site and it was accidentally zoned open space. Yeah.
Right. So no one submitter objected to the change in zoning from whatever the zoning was on the operative plan to either the OSD or the OSD or the, you know,
I don't recall. I can double check though.
that would be useful. Okay,
Um, in response to submissions received, I recommend most of the provisions across zone chapters be retained as or amended to create greater clarity and ease of use. I have read the respective to the open space and recreation zone topics. From the New Zealand and Transpower New Zealand. And since drafting this statement, I've also read the submission received heavy haulage and the legal evidence of Kiwi Rail. I acknowledge the support of Ms McLeod for to reject Transpower's requested amendments to policies NOS P1 and NOS P3 in the Section 42A report on the basis that NOS P3 provides the necessary policy pathway to give effect to the relief sought by Transpower.
thank you for that.
I respond to the remaining evidence below. All recommended changes are included in Appendix 2 of this statement. Key issue 1, do you want me to read through it?
Well, I guess if what's of interest to the panel here is two matters. Firstly, the 4 metre setback as opposed to 5 metre.
Yeah.
And how that came about. Presumably it was solely a function of the Kiwi Rail submission. And if that's the case, we need to understand on Kiwi Rail why that is. And some questions in relation to paragraph 17 about the actual properties affected.
Yes, I can speak to that difference. So, yeah, in active recreation zone in the open space zone, Kiwi Rail requests the 5 metre height setback. And in the
Metre width.
yes, and in the natural open space, they request a 4 metre setback. And that is because of that height restriction in the natural open space. As I said earlier, the height restriction is 5 metres, whereas the other two zones, you can go up to 10 metres. So it's my understanding is that you just need less.
Thank you. And do you want to take us through paragraph 17?
Yes. In considering the information contained within Ms. Smith's evidence, I note there are 4 properties in the sports and active recreation zone, 7 properties in the open space zone, and 1 property in the natural open space zone that adjoin the rail corridor in the Wairarapa. I've referenced these in Appendix 3. Of these and so considering the existing nature of these sites and that little to no built development is anticipated in the open space and recreation zones, the likelihood of safety risks arising that would affect the rail corridor is considered to be low. However, I also consider that there would be low costs in accepting Ms. Heppelthwaite's request amendments given this low likelihood of built development. I agree that a 5 metre setback in the sports and active recreation and open space zones and a 4 metre setback in the natural open space zone to the rail corridor is an appropriate distance and mechanism in managing development near the rail corridor and addressing safety concerns.
Issue is one that's come up again, the status of emergency service facilities in the zones. Like your colleagues recommended, rejection of permitted activity and adoption of restricted discretionary activity. The only question I've got for you is there a case for a different activity status in the natural open space zone, given the values that it encompasses quite different from the sports and active recreation zone and the standard open space zone?
I think there is. This was one I did go back and forth on a little bit. I think I'm comfortable with the restricted discretionary status in the natural open space because we have got matters of discretion around those character and compatibility sites. My other thought was when you look at the location of the natural open space zones, they're very rural, remote areas. I've not provided them in the mappings.
No.
And I believe the likelihood of emergency service facilities being established in these sites as.
Is there anything bespoke about the matters of discretion for emergency service facilities in the natural open space zone that differs from the other two zones, or is it
Yeah,
to repeat?
no, we did add under 3.1, the natural and ecological landscape values. These. That's the only difference.
Okay.
The only thing I can think of would be some firefighting out in some of our more remote forest parks,
Yes.
where they might just have a base that they might operate from. That would be the.
Mm.
I have a quick question. Where's Wairarapa College Farm Block?
Yes, that was an interesting one. I would probably need to ask my colleagues at MDC as to why that was applied. If you don't happen to know.
I don't know, but Christine may, and she's not online. So,
I believe it's just been in use as an agricultural block for a long period of time.
Yeah, they've got a very good farming
And
process at the school.
yes, and so it was a mechanism to protect that, and that's as much as I really know on it. But I can ask Christine, Ms. Chong.
If you thought it would be useful.
There may have some unforeseen consequences for them as an educational facility.
Right. Any other questions on the emergency service facilities topic? No? Why don't you take us through sections 5 and
So the main recommended amendments in response to submissions on the open space and recreation zone topics and noted in the section 42A report are amend rule NOS R9 being campgrounds to include sites operated by DOC, amend policy NOS B2, it's all compatible activities to include conservation management strategies and plans, and accept rezoning requests outlining key issue 6 of the section.
is that those minor areas that you were referring to?
A few larger ones, 3 blocks. Any area is,
But that's covered in your 42.
yes.
Can I just ask a quick question on NOS R9 and 1A, where it's the existing buildings on site use of tents, caravans or motorhomes, bearing in mind that you've got DOC under B, would it be appropriate for the word self-contained to be inserted? Although I guess on
Caravans and
Yeah,
motorhomes.
so I know, I suppose I just kind of read it when I know it's talking about camping grounds and when they're licensed or operated by a council, they have facilities, but because you put DOC in there, the use of tents, caravans or motorhomes, I was kind of going, would they not need to be it's just kind of like a curious question.
Yeah, I'd need to look into
Hmm.
that.
Because obviously you don't want people on dock sites that don't have facilities, but they are able to camp on that are not in self-contained. It was just a curiosity question. I thought if it's for encompassing that, maybe.
At that.
Thank you.
When you are looking at that, maybe give a indication of whether that's covered by other legislation or whether it's
Yeah.
That's what I'm thinking,
Yeah.
but I'm not too up on that.
That was, what was that? There was,
That was NOS R9
9.
on the original, on the S42 report page. On the open spaces on the actual chapter. The NOS chapter itself. It was on page 5 of 12. Yes, I was just wondering. Yeah, because that was there. It probably is already covered by other. Double check that.
Look at that.
you. We,
I was up to paragraph 25. So the recommended amendments in response to the pre-circulated expert evidence are amend standards SARS S3, Oz S3 and NOS S3 to include a minimum building setback from the rail designation along with the relevant matters of discretion, and to also insert a new rule in the 3 open space and recreation zones to provide for emergency service facilities as a restricted discretionary activity. Based on the matters raised in submissions and pre-circulated expert evidence, the following key matters remain inconsistent. Note that no evidence has been received on these matters, and I've recommended rejecting these in this section 42A. Like me to
probably take those as read, and if there are any questions about them, difficult to formulate questions in the absence of evidence. So,
Yeah.
hey, let's, thank you, Mr. Adams. That's been really useful on the open space and recreation zones. We'll come back to you again with any directions tomorrow. It's, we're going to take a break for lunch. We're well ahead of time. We'll come back after lunch and hear from Ms. Robertson on the future urban zones. And will that include Mr. Leary? Yes. And you'll also be dealing with the general industrial zone. Thank you. You know where the lunch is?
a little bit.
Oh, 1 o'clock, okay. We'll reconvene at 1 o'clock.